Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to give you guys a quick update as to all of the 9.0.5 class changes that are going to be coming up sometime in March. There's been a lot of talk, of course, about Valor points coming up and how they're going to be used to be able to upgrade your gear up to 220. And the whole thing about this patch is that it's kind of just a mid-tier patch, mid-tier balancing update that they're going to be doing, updating some of the systems, updating some of the classes to get them in a decent enough position before they actually start talking about the new raid and the new tier and everything else that'll come later. It's likely that we'll get a lot more information talking about the new tier as we get closer to BlizzCon Online, which at the time of this video is about 2 weeks from now. So my focus is I really wanted to start talking about some of the class changes that are going on, talk about where I think it's going to start changing some of the, changing or not changing, of course, some of the different healer balance and healer tuning and everything like that that's going to be coming around, and, you know, where I think it's really just going to be going from there, whether I think it's going to actually make a sizable impact in a lot of cases. So, starting it off, let's start looking at where we are at right now, as, of course, we've got annoying ads, but we've also got, you know, just looking at what the healers are kind of standing at in terms of, like, their overall throughput. You can also just take it to something along the lines of like 95th percentiles to start seeing where healers are sort of standing in throughput, but also somewhat in representation as well. I think that when it looks at like healer balance, the actual raw healing that they're doing is certainly one of the stories that you're able to look for, but I think one of the biggest ones is certainly the utility and the dominance that we've seen out of classes like Paladin having 53,000 parses, Shaman 86,000, disc almost 40k as well. And then you've got, you know, your druids, your monks, your priests and everything like that, the holy priest and everything kind of lagging behind at least somewhat. So far I think healer balance is like okay, it's been like decent, but some of these changes are trying to nudge things in the right direction, but they don't quite cover the bases. So for example, you know, adding a buff into rejuve. They're going from 104% of spell power to 116%. They're also trying to buff Adaptive Swarm as well and try to be able to provide more of an update for just underused Covenant abilities. But one of the big things that seems like with Druid right now is that they've been kind of lacking a niche entirely, especially when it comes to Mythic raiding. There's no like big, large push towards bringing that kind of healer. You know, we've had a lot of fights that require a lot of mobility. I mean, Sire, you're just running all over the place half the fight or more. And even then, you know, not crazy good because they're looking for healers that bring damage reduction to help deal with the burst damage of blood price. You know, you're having mobile or mobile enough healers like Shamans and Paladins. You know, Paladin just needs to be stuck to a mob that it can melee. And you're going to be able to do most everything on the move as well. So, Druid just has had this steady decay of their niche in a lot of respects that those sort of things don't really fix up. You know, just having another throughput increase doesn't really patch it up, and I guess that's the idea, is it's not really the point of this sort of patch. It's not really the point to massively change the healer meta, and historically they don't really like changing the healer meta all that much, so I guess that trend sort of continues. I mean, look at like where we're at with Renewing Mist, you know? Cost change from 2.2% to 2.1%, you know? In general, not really trying to change the costs at all. They did some of these just level 60 updates, for example, requiring level 60 for the different conduits. They also made it so that Vivify costs a little bit less mana instead of 4.1%, 3.8%. But like, when it comes down to it, Mistweaver's okay on mana consumption. It's certainly one of the healers that can take crazy advantage of Innervate, Power Infusion, even some of their legendaries, for example, like Invokers. Whenever you summon your Celestial, you get a crazy amount of haste. You know, you can absolutely obliterate your entire mana pool over the course of that duration, you know. I wouldn't say that Mistweaver is like naturally super mana hungry, but I don't think that this is just going to make some sizable difference. It's just going to like make things feel slightly better for specs that have been underperforming. But when it comes to Mistweaver, when it comes to Druid, and even Holy Priest in some aspects, they are just really lacking a niche that's going to help them break more into higher level content. So they also have a couple updates for some of the different Covenant abilities and everything like that we've been talking about for Mistweaver. They had just had the mana cost changes. Paladin, it's just kind of like following the same sort of trend. You know, cost change from 14% of base mana to 16%. Paladin barely uses mana as is, and none of these changes also are going to address things like Ashen Hollow, absolutely dominating, providing a very sizable damage increase to the spec, and Paladin just in general dealing so much more damage than everybody else. That was our damage on Sludge Fist that we were looking at earlier on stream. But just looking at damage on all bosses at the 99th percentile on Mythic for all healers is just ridiculous. It's actually just freaking ridiculous how much Holy Paladin does in terms of his damage. Being able to kind of bring at least some of these other healers up a little bit, maybe bringing Pally down from the 39 level to like 32 or 30 or something like that, would be really freaking lovely, but I don't think it's that terribly likely that it's going to be happening. I mean, they're updating Vanquisher's Hammer, for example, for the Necrolords to just generate holy power. I'm like, hey, kind of cool. They're getting some more holy power, but none of the big Covenant changes that I've been seeing seem to really make a lot of headway in changing what people are already doing. So, one of the big things, of course, that I know a lot of people are going to be asking me about is the Spirit Shell nerf. It's probably the most sizable of the changes that the healers are receiving right now. So for the next 10 seconds, Penance, Radiance, Atonement, create absorbs for 80% of their value instead of 100%. So, this is actually very interesting because, for one, how impactful is it? Is this wrong? Are we going back to evangelism? Probably not. Right now, with how much stamina and intellect and power that the healers have, getting to cap your Spirit Shell, getting to that 60% of your maximum health pool is very easy. When this nerf comes in, it will absolutely be harder to be able to generate that cap, but just because you're not capping your absorb or you're taking longer to cap your absorb doesn't mean that you're not getting great value out of it. You know, being able to preempt damage before anybody is able to heal it is so crazy insane that I was actually surprised that they allow you to just create absorbs instead of healing for the exact same value, and they last for 10 seconds, so there's a lot of leeway as to whenever they're going to actually fall off. But apparently they did, and they very quickly learned that that's busted. And I still think that having, 80% of the normal value as a tax on your healing of sorts is still going to make it so that disc is still super strong. It'll take a longer time for Discipline to be able to generate a fully capped shield, but they still are able to generate them really quickly, and it continues because they have so much stats and so much power and everything, that this is basically just like the nerfs that Discipline received constantly throughout Warlords of Draenor to Power Word Shield, if you remember that. A little bit more recent history, BFA, every single tier, Disc either got a damage nerf or an atonement nerf. Now the difference here, though, is that nobody does and nobody should run Spirit Shell in dungeons. So this is actually kind of a nice boon for the M+ Disc Priests out there. Partially because they've already nerfed our damage and healing so much that we're already Shadowman spammers in dungeons anyway, but at least they won't get further and further down that path because they're focusing on something that is specifically for raiding rather than something that's affecting raiding and Mythic Plus at the same time. So Spirit Shell still going to be very strong. It's basically just going to be the same kind of trend that BFA had, where you're going to feel bad about it once those changes hit, and Disc is still just going to be an owner. So Kiss of Death, kind of funny on this one. They're buffing the Kiss of Death legendary to give you more cooldown reduction for Shadow Word Death. And this one and the other legendary I'm going to show you in a second are like really funny to me because they know like how they killed these legendaries, because it happened over multiple different changes. We used Kiss of Death all the time in early beta when it first came out and had a great time with it, loved playing with it, used it on a couple of boss fights as well for PTR, beta testing and everything like that. And then they kept gradually nerfing it, and then, what do you know, nobody used it. Like, Shadow Word Death just doesn't really deal that much damage. So, constantly having a lower cooldown isn't really going to make much headway there, in my opinion. They made some changes to these anima powers. These are just Torghast things, so I'm not really going to fixate onto them. For Night Fae, oh man, they're really trying to buff up Night Fae here. They're causing the damage reduction to be 15% instead of 10%. They're having the cooldown recovery rate be 150% instead of 100%. And they're going to have, I think I covered all my bases, right? Oh, cooldown reduction, damage reduction, and the mana was already still any targets. It was still direct attacks by any of your allies and anything like that. So I guess they just updated the phrasing on that somewhat. So there you go. This, once again, maybe this will actually make some headway for Holy Priests and have them more likely to just play around with reducing Divine Hymn CD or something along those lines. But on the side of Disc, getting more Spirit Shells isn't really... It's more of like a niche fight-by-fight thing. Like, if they made it so that there's a number of different fight timers where, like... I mean, even then, it would actually be pretty rough because you don't even have the Radiances to be able to get any of the healing out. So you pretty much just wouldn't have the mana to be able to afford to do this, even if there were fight mechanics that would allow you to have multiple Spirit Shells and stuff. So maybe like a worst case scenario if they continue with the trend of like nerfing heavy Spirit Shell over and over, and we would just be brought for the Bard to reduce people's cooldowns. That'd probably be a nightmare. First impression, just seems like this is like an MDI buff. It's like pushing people to go play Fae so that they can buff up their fire mages so they can have more combusts and be really happy. Something like that. I know that they really are trying to buff up some of these other covenants and everything like that, but I don't see much headway from being made for Disc on the Night Fae train. For Holy, I think you're pretty flexible when it comes to covenants already. And if you really like the aesthetic of Night Fae, yeah, sure, go crazy. You still got to be able to find enough timers to be able to fit in each of these Divine Hymns and not also overlap with other healers, because there are other healers in the raid. And being able to like organize cooldowns is often a game of just stacking a lot of them together to be able to obliterate whatever's coming to you. So that happens. The other legendary, before I got sidetracked though, is Cauterizing Shadows. They nerfed this legendary 3 different times. And then now they're trying to buff it very slightly, right? So initially, it was whenever Purge the Wicked expired or the target died with Purge the Wicked on them, or Shadow of Pain, and it would heal 3 allies, actually maybe even 5 allies. It was multiple allies for a percentage of their maximum health, which was nutty. And then they made it so that whenever a target dies, it doesn't actually count as an expiry, so it just didn't count. Then they made it a lower percentage of their HP, and then they made it spell power. So now they're trying to bring it back up a little bit in spell power to try to find some sweet spot, but people already don't want to run this legendary because it's already been nerfed so crazy heavily. There's, I don't know, no take-backsies on that one, right? Just seems really silly. Just really seems quite silly as to why they're buffing up bad legendaries that people already don't want to run. On the rest of Shaman train, however, a couple of, again, Covenant updates and everything like that for the rest of Shaman, like Soulbinds. They just, again, followed up with this, you know, requires level 60 and everything like that. And these are all on Wowhead if you guys want to check them out as well. So, hey, Fae Transfusion and everything like that. Once again, pushing the Night Fae. Again, taking the life force from 4 enemies for 117% of spell power, releasing 60% instead of 40% of all damage from Fae Transfusion as allies, or onto allies up to 20 yards away, everything like that. I don't know if that would really make a lot of headway, because they're also buffing Primordial Wave at the same time. So I know it says damage onto this one, but if you actually pull up the entirety of the thing, at the bottom right of the second Primordial Wave column, you'll see it's 150% of normal. That's what they're really changing, is 150% of normal instead of 100% of normal damage or healing or what have you. So, yeah, next healing wave is going to hit all targets affected by Riptide for 150% of normal healing. Again, this is still early. They still got about a month or so to be able to suss out any of the other changes that they want to be able to cook up and everything, but kind of weird that they're going after that. Didn't really think that Primordial Wave was really on the docket for things that needed crazy amounts of buffs, but hey. A couple little changes going to be coming up on the horizon for those healers. And in general, I don't think it's going to make a crazy amount of headway when it comes to, like, balance, because balance isn't just raw healer throughput, you know? It's nice and it gets talked about a lot when it comes to, like, oh, she bring this healer or that healer or something, but that's often not the end-all be-all. People will view it that way for, like, you know, normal or heroic rating, that whichever healer does the most healing, they're doing the best job. But when it comes to, like, very hardcore environments, and the world first, and even with, like, M+, high-end M+, you know, there's utility, there's being able to have the right type of healing and having, you know, the square peg and the square hole, you know, being able to fill in this specific niche that you need to be able to have. As an example, damage for healers wasn't really viewed as being that massive of a deal this tier in Castle Nathria. Partially because of the reason that Paladin just carried it naturally for everybody anyway, right? If your group had a Disc Priest, a Shaman, and 2 Holy Paladins, and you needed more damage, you didn't really like press your rest of Shaman and Disc Priest to blast tons of extra damage when they could, because the Paladins would often just be able to carry it in large strides. You know, I'd absolutely love it if they started to try to balance healer damage a bit more, but I think one of the big things that sort of stands out to it is that they fill in that niche, and they fill in other niches as well, right? They bring damage reduction. They are in melee and everything, which can be a plus or minus depending on the fights, but they're crazy super sturdy, they don't die, they've got immunities, they've got crazy damage, best single target healing, don't use any mana, all these different things. And then you start compiling all these different things into one healer and you shove it out there, and of course people are going to class stack it. Of course it's going to be, you know, one of the highest represented healers out there. Shaman, same kind of story, you know. The niche that Shaman was dependent on of having people stacked in their healing range or close enough for chain heal or anything like that, you know, those sort of exist, but you're not really dependent on that anymore because Riptide is just carrying the spec super crazy hard. So you're able to get away with not doing crazy amount of damage. You're able to get away with playing Shaman on fights where not necessarily everybody's stacked all the time. Although, to be fair, this raid did have a lot of stacked points where Shaman's Spirit Link was super good. But from like an entire package perspective, you're okay bringing a Shaman, for example, on those fights where you're not always getting insane value out of Spirit Link because of the fact that there's a lot of other pluses about the spec, you know? So they're kind of just rolling a lot of those different things in. And obviously, of course, for Discipline, you have mass absorption events, which nobody is able to beat. Or you have, you know, overall, the reason you're getting so ahead, the reason Disc Priest looks so ahead is like a lot of times you preempt damage more than anybody else, you know? The common strategy for Council of Blood is pop all the damage reduction cooldowns, stack up, shield everybody, and then everybody jumps. So all the healing that could be there is reduced, or all the damage that on the raid is reduced by damage reduction cooldowns, and whatever damage does get through gets absorbed by the Disc Priest, you know? Hungry Destroyer, you just make it so that some people can't be healed, but they can be shielded, you know? Same thing with Stone Legion Generals, right? You have the Goliath, which has the negative healing aura, but then you could just shield over them with Spirit Shell. Kind of crazy. I don't even think the disc is high end. Yeah, okay, they're like second place on Stone Legion, which makes sense. But being able to like bypass mechanics is always going to make you super crazy. So sure, they're going to actually go in and they're going to nerf Spirit Shell. But being able to bypass mechanics, being able to jump ahead of everybody else is just ridiculous. And it's just going to stay ridiculous for quite a while. So there you go. My quick take is that healer balance isn't going to be overly shook up, and this isn't going to be some just like golden bullet that strikes down the discs from the priests. It's just going to make them feel worse, same as we've had for all of BFA as well, just to kind of get that heal check or that gut check to the spec. And maybe they'll add more nerfs before the next tier, and maybe this will be enough to where they feel like they won't need to. But either way, it's an independent variable that's not going to affect Disconnect Plus, and that feels all right as well. So let me know what you guys think. If I missed anything else, be sure to let me know down in the comments below and everything like that, and just put this together really quick before I head it off after stream. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Let me know which video you guys want me to work on next, and yeah, I'll catch y'all next time.